Well, hello everyone. How are you doing? I was hoping everything came up fine, but it actually didn't. I don't have Bunchy. Now I do. And I didn't have my logo, which I do have now, which is always nice to have. Okay, so we are going on part 2. If you didn't watch part 1, you might be a little lost. Let me do the YouTuber stuff first. I would really, really appreciate it if you would subscribe. I meant to do some new graphics for the subscribe because you can't really read it really well. But I've been so busy with a couple other shows and other things that I'm doing that I just completely forgot. Would really appreciate it if you would just hit subscribe. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. Twitter handle, Karen Ann Harlos, CarynAnnHarlos. But I am going to give you a fair warning. If you get all ass chaps when someone says something you don't agree with once in a while, you're not going to want to follow me because you're not going to agree with me all the time. You're not going to be able to put me in a box because there's plenty of people who try to. Oh, you were that Mises person. You must be paleo or whatever the term is now. Or you've got pink hair. You must be a leftist, or you this or you that. I defy explanation. I'm not in any of those boxes. And if you can't handle that, baby doll, then I'm not the one for you. But if you can handle that, Karen Ann Harlos, I would love to have you, and I do follow back. So if you give me a follow, and if I somehow forgot to follow you back in the past, just shoot me a little reminder, and I will make sure I do. And last but not least, please support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Pink Flame of Liberty, or super chats and super thanks always help. Some butthurt people got a little mad and left, but I've been gaining some subscribers, patrons. That's what I meant to say again, and I do appreciate one of my older patrons coming back due to changed financial circumstances. Before we go any further, do have a sponsor, Sean Dempsey, who's been a sponsor of the show for a long time, and I thank you, Sean, for defending me on that post. Like, oh my God, she doesn't agree with us. She must be a leftist. I'm not a leftist. Not a rightist either. I'm what's called a libertarian. And I don't fancy one or the other, but I do fancy Sean Dempsey in a complete friend way, completely platonic way. And I have promoted children's books that he has written before that I did in fact read and enjoy. I'm not much of an investor. I probably should be, but this is The Investor's Warp Whistle. That's not kind on people with a lisp, Sean. I will correct my show notes. I've got a lot of cleanup work to do on my shows, but you can look for this under the last name Dempsey, Dempsey, on Amazon. I know he's only needs to get a few more verified purchaser reviews by the end of October. That's really, really important to him. So again, please, long time sponsor of this show. And remember, if you're a top patron and you have a Liberty product of any kind, I will promote it for you. And you could even take advantage of asking me a question to address a month. And if I can, I will. I'll tell you when there is something I don't feel competent to talk about. So without further ado, let me get that off the screen, and let's continue where we left off, which was with the trigonometry show, and dealing with, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the lady's name again, who says that progress is bad for women, basically. She's anti-progress. And I sympathized with her in some way. It was my anarcho-primitivist tendencies coming out. And speaking of anarcho, my Anarchon shirt. Yes, I still have it. And yes, that is a honey badger. So we're going to try to continue where we left off, and we'll see how far we go. I don't know if I'm going to do the whole trigonometry show. If I feel like I'm repeating myself, we'll be done. But this is a difficult conversation, I think. I think we've flattened out the differences between the sexes, and that's just not biological reality. And if you are a normal person who believes in evolution, you know that's just not the way we evolved. Now, maybe that's the way we are evolving, but that happens usually over long periods of time. But then again, we can get into epigenetics and all that. So let's continue where we left off. And please, I'd love to hear from you in comments.
And these tended to be more sort of upper bourgeois women. And so you have this sort of bifurcation of, there are women who push for greater valorization of care, and then there are women who push for women to have personhood, understood as being an atomized market participant on the same terms as men. And these are the two poles of pre-cyborg feminism, which I think of as feminism proper, which is the feminism of freedom and the feminism of care. And there's a huge range of views within those two poles, and the back and forth between them and the negotiation and trying to find a
I guess what I'm getting at is there really this big difference between the feminism of freedom and the feminism of care? And again, this is where my panarchy will come out. In true feminism of freedom, you should be able to choose the feminism of care, even if other women think you are subjugating yourself. A truly free person can choose not to be free. What they can't do is choose for others not to be free. But I find her really, really interesting. And again, I haven't listened to this whole interview yet. So these are, I drank that Mountain Dew too fast. These are contemporaneous reactions. Let's continue.
Healthy balance between freedom and the needs of dependence is, I think, probably the best characterization you can give of what feminism looked like up until the cyborg revolution.
Before we get to the cyborg, though, there's
that's a whole.
Well, I'm sure we will. There's also the sexual revolution to consider, which we kind of skipped over.
That is the cyborg revolution.
You did? Oh, that is the cyborg.
That is the cyborg revolution.
Because I thought the cyborg revolution was going to be slightly more recent. But anyway,
No.
Tell us about the cyborgs.
Well, I mean, I've made the case more starkly since I finished writing Feminism Against Progress. But I realised actually the pithiest way I can say this is to make the claim that the contraceptive pill is the first transhumanist technology.
Okay. I prefer to go back to the full screen. It's easier for me if I want to take clips out as well. Isn't that interesting that the contraceptive pill was the first cyborg, she said first transhumanist revolution in controlling very, very natural cycles of the body. That is certainly something to think about. And I don't think we've done nearly enough thought about that. We've only thought about the convenience. Now, let's remember what she said at the very beginning of this show. Yes, there are good things, but there's always a cost, and count the cost. Now, I was on birth control for the majority of my life, and I didn't think twice about it. And I know this is going to sound like a weird analogy, but you want to know something? People who grew up in the pre-Civil War South didn't think much about slavery either. It was just a way of life. But when you think about that, you are just completely altering the natural hormonal function of a biological body, there is no way that does not have severe consequences. Now, maybe the cost is worth it to you, but it is certainly something to consider. I think something very interesting to consider. And that's why a lot of them I call them the granola types, the crunchies. We got a lot of them in Boulder, Colorado, are completely eschewing hormonal birth control.
I mean, it's the first major widespread social biomedical intervention which aims not at fixing something which has gone wrong with normal health, but upgrading normal. in line with what people want. I mean, if you think about what contraceptive pill does, it actually interrupts normal healthy fertility in the interests of essentially personal freedom. And in that.
So what is more important? It is in the name of personal freedom. And she's positing a clash between them. I would not posit a clash between them, but I would say that minimizing the cost for political reasons is not in the best interest of women. And at first I was going to disagree with her on the issue of, not fixing something that's supposed to naturally be occurring. I would say, well, wouldn't you consider plastic surgery some sort of transhumanism as well? And maybe in some small instance you can, but it doesn't interrupt the natural function of the body. Now, of course, that can get us all into the trans issue, which was dealt with on another show I was listening to, where the person actually had a very, very libertarian argument that would disturb a lot of conservatives, basically arguing for not lying to yourselves, not lying that you can actually turn a boy into a girl, and that adults should be able to do whatever they want as long as they are going into it eyes wide open. And it was a really, really interesting show. And just like with the euthanasia show that I did, which, I felt was a difficult discussion, I've been trying to have a lot of difficult shows, difficult philosophical shows, where should something be called medicine that isn't restoring normal function or preserving life? Do we need another term? And perhaps that is also what she's getting at. There seems to be a theme in the shows I've been dealing with lately. I can see how many of y'all are watching. And I know it's mostly Twitter. Go to YouTube so you can comment, because I feel lonely without your comments.
And in that sense, it's a radically different paradigm for what biomedical technologies can and should do. And that obviously, as we know, was legalized and spread like wildfire in the 1960s. And downstream of that came a whole load of other technological transformation. We're a good way further down the path that started. But my argument is that we became cyborgs, and women became cyborgs arguably ahead of men, at the point where we accepted transhumanist medicine as a basic enabling condition for women's participation in society, which really began in the 1960s.
Okay, but wouldn't transhumanist medicine, I guess you'd make the difference from interrupting a natural function to a natural normal function to enhancing something? Because, there were, correct me if I'm wrong, okay? I'm not a medical historian by any means, but, we had dialysis and pacemakers and all kinds of, implants that can go into the body. Is that transhumanism of a sort, of not allowing nature to take its natural course, where you have a mechanism on your heart that restarts it if it stops? Now, perhaps again, she's making the distinction between, your heart should be beating, so you have something where it's malfunctioning and you keep it beating, rather than suppressing the natural fertility of women. And she said, in the name of freedom. Of course, I'm going to come down on the side of freedom, but I'm also going to come down on the side of fully informed consent. My eyes have been really, really opened to how women have not been told the complete truth about the risks and dangers and trade-offs of birth control. And that's in a lot of things in our lives. The way our food, like even, and I'm not trying to go all Alex Jones, but I don't think we think of these sorts of things. Okay, we got these 4G cell phones. Now, do I think 4G cell phones are like beaming messages from outer space into our brain or anything like that? No. But are there health consequences? I would be surprised if there weren't, but we don't even think of that. We just gobble up this technology as if it's a good thing, and it might be. We need to count the cost, but the problem is the cost has become a political discussion rather than just a realistic discussion. You can't even discuss without people calling you names, natural differences between the sexes. It just gets to be crazy because and I understand why, like if you start talking about studies about different population groups, yes, that's very collectivist. And as a libertarian, I'm going to go, that may be true on a widespread collective when you're just doing science, but you need to judge each person as an individual because you don't know where they lie. I certainly am not the typical woman in a lot of ways, and if all you did was take averages, then that wouldn't apply. Now, I'm not saying this to brag or anything, and there's been a wide variation in the testing that I have done. But in general, I have read, this could be wrong, that the average IQ, for instance, of a woman is typically around 100. I've tested between 145 and 160. So obviously well outside the mean. I'm really stupid in some things, but in that kind of thing, I did well. So you do have to take each person as an individual. But evolution has ingrained in us to take the averages and the typical situations because of our survival instincts.
Wow. I mean, that's a really, really good way of putting it. My question to you is this. What does feminism now mean, Mary? Because we've got first, second, third. I mean, we've got more waves in the Mediterranean Sea. So what does it actually mean when we use this word? Because I think that's important when we have this discussion.
Well, it really depends who you ask. I mean, there are... I would... If you want to take the sort of consensus view of what I think of as magazine feminism, if you know the kind of pop version that comes out in articles about who you should or shouldn't date and why, you know, that kind of the sort of Jezebel feminism. I would say the broad consensus is probably that feminism is... Actually, I'm just going to quote The Onion at you here. Feminism is anything a woman does. That's to put it very crudely, you know. And really, this also is downstream of the cyborg revolution because it's... I've argued...
And she's probably going to get into this, but that's funny, but it's also sad. Yeah, feminism is whatever a woman does. A woman is whoever says they're a woman. That has turned reality into nonsense. And it's one reason why I don't consider myself a feminist and I don't consider myself oppressed.
The arrival of the pill, and particularly with the inevitable consequence of the arrival of the pill, which was the legalization of abortion, the feminism of freedom decisively defeated the feminism of care. Because
Mary, I'm so sorry to interrupt, and also I don't want to interfere with Francis' line of questioning, but I'm curious. I think I know why you say that the legalization of abortion is a consequence of the pill. Is it just like a more advanced version of the same thing, essentially? Is that what you're saying? Or why is legalization of abortion a consequence of the pill?
Well, yeah. People hope, when they campaigned first for the pill, the hope was that there would be, as a result of the pill, there would be fewer accidental pregnancies, and therefore, you know, it would make, you know, women's reproductive choices much more within women's control. But what happened in practice was, well, the absolute number of accidental pregnancies went up, not down. And that was because there was just so much more casual sex happening. Because it radically moved the goalposts for what you could or couldn't do. And it's only mostly effective. It's not 100% effective. So there was still enough.
Okay, I'm sorry, got to go autistic on you. If you're going by there's two ways to look at things: sheer numbers and percentages. I'm curious, and she might get into it. Did the percentages of accidental pregnancies go down? Well, the sheer numbers went up because the sheer amount of sex went up, because people were scared before or were more cautious of the potential consequences. And it was women who bore those consequences. And I'm sure she'll get into that. But I'm hoping we get into some more libertarian-oriented issues, but let's see where she's going.
Oops pregnancies. Despite
more, in fact.
The rate of accidental pregnancy went down, but there was so much more sex happening that the absolute number went up. And at that point, it created an inevitable ratchet towards saying, well, what are we going to do about all these accidental pregnancies? Because then it was very difficult to put back in the box. I mean, it was pretty much impossible to put it back in the box. Because people are saying, well, they have the pill now. And everybody's got the pill, and so they're all at it like rabbits. And, we can't stop this now. So, we have to do something about, this is obviously not a tenable situation. Women are, bleeding out in alleyways with coat hangers up them. And, this is horrendous. We've got to do something. Because they'd opened Pandora's box. And so many of the very strict social controls which had previously obtained around premarital sex were beginning to fall away. And the case became very compelling to legalize abortion. But of course, once you do that, you're saying that women's autonomy women's autonomy is that much more important than the needs of a dependent, and it doesn't really get much more dependent than an unborn baby that's can't survive outside.
Okay, now there's where the libertarian big. I've done whole shows on abortion and managed to piss everyone off. So I guess that means I'm a real libertarian. I am a pro-life libertarian. However, I do not believe the government should be involved. I am what the platform used to say before. I've done whole shows on this. I've had other pro-lifers get really, really angry at me and say, I'm not a real pro-lifer. That's okay. Apparently, I'm not a real anarchist either. The pink hair is not real. The shades don't match the drapes. Or what is it? The curtains don't match it. Whatever it might be. The rug, the carpet doesn't match the drapes. Don't care. Pink hair, don't care. Yeah, that is where the rubber meets the road, is control over one's body. I don't think there is perfect justice in this world. I am a Christian, and that's ultimately where justice is going to be found. I am going to side always on the side of bodily autonomy, though I will make a perfectly libertarian argument why. If you did not take reasonable precautions to prevent pregnancy, which the pill does allow, then morally, I believe you are obliged to have that child. But if you did, I do not believe morally, in a justice sense of the word, you are. As a Christian, I believe you are, but that's a different argument. That is a religious argument. So I see where she is going now, and it is in a very anti-libertarian direction, that the very fact of dependence of reproduction should be a curtail on women's freedom. And I am just not going to agree with that. And I actually think that that is something that is a deep, unspoken undercurrent in this party. meaning the Libertarian Party. In 1972, when our first platform was written, it only advocated for the legalization of abortion for the first 100 days. Then Roe versus Wade happened, and it had always then just been in favor of whatever was legal at the time. I don't think it's an easy issue. I think it's a complex issue, despite the fact that I am pro-life myself. But in order to have bodily autonomy, yes, some of that will go to the side. But women are not slaves to society. And I do not believe that women should be slaves, obviously, to reproduction as well. And people just go, oh, just don't have sex. That's like saying, why don't you just move into a mansion? It's a strong, strong natural biological urge that people are just going to do. And to say just don't do it, you might as well just tell me to sprout a third eyeball. That's not going to happen, particularly with younger people.
Mother's body, that you can end the potential life of the dependent in order to safeguard the freedom. And so at that point, the feminism of freedom and the feminism of care collided, and history tells us which one won, and that's the world we've been living ever since. And so I think that's the long answer, Francis, to your question of what is feminism. It's the feminism as we understand it today, in its mainstream sense, is a doctrine which argues that we can and should use technology in to the fullest extent possible to flatten the differences between the sexes.
And what's wrong with that?
Even at the expense of unborn lives.
But what's wrong with that?
That's what's wrong with it, I think.
But there's a lot of women who would actually disagree with you, who say, look, I live in a society which is freer than ever. I have more choice than ever before. I can pick a wide range of careers. I can choose when I want to have a child. Surely these are all positive things, Mary.
Yes, but they're not without cost. I entirely agree with you that these are all positives, but they're not cost-free, I think, and that's really what. So that gets us to the end of part one.
And there we go. It's not cost-free. We do have to count the cost, and on this issue, I have counted the cost and come on the side of freedom. There comes a time where you have to, within your own cultures and communities, instill a certain sense of individual morality. Now, let's see where she's going with part two. This is probably where I should have ended part one, because she says now we're moving on to the next section. But let's see where we go from here. I have a feeling we may have covered most of the libertarian issues.
Part two really is about some of the undercounted costs of the victory of freedom over care when it comes, or rather tech-enabled freedom over care in the domain of feminism. And so I've looked at the war it's been waging on our relationship, on the relations between men and women, on the war it's been waging on the relations between mothers and babies, and finally the war it wages on our relationship with our own bodies.
Flesh those out for us, please.
Okay, so
wrong turn of phrase. But you know what I mean.
War on relationships. Let's think. How do I characterize this? The point at which you can use technology to flatten the difference between the sexes is the point at which sex leaves the domain of management by social norms and becomes something which is theoretically free. It becomes private. So, I mean, let me back up a little bit. So, if you imagine it's 1910. You know, I'm female. You know, I'm a young woman. I get horny like all humans do, whereas in adolescence. There are very, very, you know, my mum tells me never be seen alone with a guy. You know, they can get ideas. You know, and you're warned at all. You know, and you're supervised carefully by your aunties and your mum, and this is all with a very pragmatic intent. And it might seem unfair because guys don't get this level of supervision and constraint. But there's a very practical intent behind it, which is that, if I get knocked up by mistake with somebody who then disappears on me, it's a problem. It's not just a problem for me. It's a problem for everybody in my immediate family, and it's a problem for wider society. So whether or not it's unfair, the basic asymmetry between the reproductive roles of men and women just forces, a pragmatic response to that at scale. In order to manage the challenge posed to everybody in general.
Okay, yeah, I agree with H. and she is dressed like this still 1910. Yeah, there is was a fundamental asymmetry. It's not good that was flattened out. I think that actually is good that was flattened out. Because the asymmetry did, in fact, cause a lot of inequalities. Like she said, well, it wasn't fair. Men didn't have this kind of scrutiny. I agree. There certainly was practical reasons for that, but that doesn't mean it was fair. And I'm pretty glad that it's not like that anymore. And I thank you guys for commenting, because then you keep me from being lonely, and I remind everyone, super chats always matter. But, I'm trying to keep these shows an hour or under, these more long form, critical shows. But let's continue with what she has to say. This is getting very, very interesting, and it seems like she's almost going to a place where it's almost like she's going to a place where she's going to say that there cannot be healthy relationships between men and women without this asymmetry. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. But I also don't think it's unhealthy or wrong or anti-libertarian to voluntarily choose that asymmetry. But I'm glad, and I think it's beneficial, that we have the choice to not choose it.
By unplanned babies. So there's this intense social pressure from all directions, which is aimed at funneling couples into something like functional dyads, which can raise children together, because it's just the result is just less messy when you do it like that. Mm-hmm. Then you add the pill into the mix. All of a sudden, all of those rules are theoretically weightless. You don't need them anymore, because I can just take this medicine, which means that I can have as much sex as I want. But the thesis I've advanced for what happens at that point is that when in theory, my sexuality is now my private domain. But what happens at that point isn't just a dividend of freedom, but the market also moves into that space. Because once something belongs just to me, in theory, I can buy or sell it as I see fit. And really, the governing, the common thread to these various wars on relationships is the way that technologies, the intervention of technologies into our bodies, seems to privatize the different facets of our bodies, whether that's our fertility, our sexuality, or even really our embodiment itself. But in practice, what happens...
And I don't have a problem with that. She's going to get into the commoditization of fertility and things like that. And I know it's all the tradcon rage to be against that sort of thing. But I don't know, the arrow of time does not go backwards like that. And yes, I do think if I own my body, I should be able to commodify it. 23 Ski 2. I don't think she wants bodies to be public. I think she wants the regulation of them to be public. I think that's more what she's getting at. And it's a collectivist idea that we are less than society, that there is this ephemeral concept, and this is where the post-libertarians are going, called quote-unquote society, that somehow has collectively a greater right than any of the individuals that are within it. And that is exactly opposite of libertarianism. And conservatism believes that as well. People have been getting like really, really Uchi. I don't know if that's a word other people use. I use the word Uchi all the time. I'm like, you're a conservative. You're not a libertarian. And that's not an insult. It's just called like proper definitions. There are an awful lot of people on Twitter who think they're libertarians. They are not. Now, they might have some libertarian ideas, and that's great. I think most people have some libertarian ideas. Even some of the most authoritarian people you can think of have some libertarian ideas. But for someone to be a libertarian, to me, Larry Sharp uses the 80-20 rule. I actually would narrow it a little bit more than that, that if you're going to call a person a libertarian, I'm more with Rothbard, that you're allowed like 2 or 3 deviations before you start getting into semi-libertarian or non-libertarian territory.
Is that becomes commodified. So in the context of sex, the empire of the porn industry and the sex industry began to mushroom the moment those constraints on sex went away. The prostitution isn't called the world's oldest industry for nothing. It's always been there, but it absolutely boomed from the 60s onwards. I mean, Hugh Hefner's Playboy and Playboy clubs appeared the same year as the pill was legalized. And by the 1970s,
did it absolutely bloom after the pill? She admitted prostitution is the world's oldest profession. But you want to know what that means? Might not have been as effective or safe. That contraception has always been around. And so has abortion. Because women making their living at that needed those things as well. Certainly not as advanced or safe or anything like that. But the commodification of sex has always existed. Now, she says it boomed since the pill. Maybe. Or has it just come more out in the open and be more exposed? I don't really want to use that word in this context, but exposed maybe is the right word, because a lot of the shame factor was taken away. And H. Reardon, I am going to be doing a show on the no true Scotsman fallacy, because I'm going to tell you a real technical term. What you just said is utter fucking bullshit. Someone who, let's define what a Scotsman is. A Scotsman, let's just say, is someone who was born in Scotland. I was born in America. I'm not a Scotsman. Is that a fallacy? No. The no true Scotsman fallacy, and I am so tired of ignorant people using it in a fallacious way. A no true Scotsman fallacy is when you take something that has nothing to do with where you were born, whether or not you were born in Scotland, and making that a characteristic of being born in Scotland by saying something like, no true Scotsman would ever cheat on his wife. Well, whether or not you cheat on your wife has nothing to do with where you were born. I have to say that the use of that fallacy right there so fallaciously is probably one of the most commonly misused terms of illogic disguised as logic. You can define what a libertarian is. Just like, that's like saying, well, if you're saying a biological male can't turn into a biological female, that's a no true Scotsman fallacy. It's retarded. It's completely and absolutely retarded. And you can be offended by me saying that, and I don't care. Because, like, the misuse of that is so offensive to me.
Radical feminists were protesting against the endemic and increasingly violent and degrading nature of pornography, which was now just being marketed pretty much openly. Because sexuality was privatized, suddenly there was this libertarian argument for letting women do whatever they wanted with their bodies. Now, in practice, if you speak to a survivor...
Yeah, yes, and I'm all for that. There's a really interesting sociological study I read that why is violent porn so popular? Or, let's get even a little more racier, is why is it that there are so many females that seem to be like kind of into that kind of thing? There could be a biological reason. Now, this study could be absolutely wrong, but what's interesting is that in pre-civilization times or less civilized times, a man with a capacity for violence was a protector. So women found the capacity for violence erotic. It certainly is an explanation. Is it the explanation? I don't know, but I found it fascinating.
Of the sex or the porn industries, they'll tell you that, in fact, there's a great deal more coercion that goes into that than the libertarian arguments might like to believe. But fundamentally, this is the pattern that I wanted to sketch out, is that it's impossible to separate liberation from commodification. And the same goes as well for the fertility industry, which is to say the moment in theory I can control my fertility, it becomes theoretically possible to commodify my fertility. So if you fast forward a number of decades on from the arrival of the pill, we're a long way down that path. I mean, we have young women who've been rendered infertile by selling their eggs in order to pay for college tuition. We have entire... I'm sure you saw the headlines during...
And if they've been told that's a possibility and they are adults, they should be allowed to do that. You might not like that. And in fact, when they get older, they may regret that decision. And I would hope they would speak out then to younger women to pass on the wisdom of the ages. But I don't have a problem with people commodifying their fertility. You either own your body or you do not.
War in Ukraine began, of these Ukrainian surrogates. It's a big industry over there. Impoverished young women in the Ukraine who essentially rent their wombs to wealthy Westerners who either don't want to gestate themselves or don't have a uterus between them, or for whatever reason. And all these babies,
who, by the way, have postponed having children to the point where they're physically unable, precisely because of the society we now have.
Precisely because of that. And all these babies, lined up in rows in bomb shelters without motherless babies essentially. And their gestational surrogates have left, and then they're just sort of being cared for under kind of semi-factory conditions by a couple of nurses with the bombs falling overhead. Just astonishingly dystopian images. Which is again what you begin to see once you privatize something which was previously governed by social norms. And finally, in the same context, I've argued
to go here. Yeah, that certainly is saddening, and you can come up with very sad situations when it wasn't quite so easy for surrogacy, with heartbroken people who couldn't have children. Nobody is claiming that perfection is on the table. we need to deal with those situations where there is obvious tragedy going on without saying we have to sacrifice our freedom.
Technologies which enable us to flatten the differences between the sexes, fundamentally, beginning with the pill and abortion, are in logical continuity with the technologies now being employed by transgender identified people to become, as they see it, their true selves, in ways which use technology to flatten the differences between the sexes or to remodel secondary sex characteristics in line with their preferred felt sense of self. So really, I'm very straightforwardly, I'm arguing that you couldn't have trans people without the pill and abortion, and that and any coherent critique of trans identity has to begin with a coherent critique of what the pill does, because fundamentally, if you're going to say women are allowed to emancipate ourselves by getting rid of what makes us by using technology to flatten what makes us distinctively female, why shouldn't other people become more fully themselves using technologies to flatten what make them distinctively themselves?
Okay, I think that was super a stretch, and I actually found that somewhat demeaning. I know she's speaking of the averages, or in a typical, normal, healthy situation, but is the capacity to bear children, and we're not dealing with them. Well, we are. I'm going to bring it up a little bit, but not even really getting into the fact of that there are some women who are naturally infertile. I think there's a whole lot more to being a woman than the fact that normal, healthy female bodies have the capacity to have children. There is a lot more to it than that. And for her to say, well, controlling your own fertility or deciding you don't want a child is what flattens the differences. I mean, I think it certainly does level the playing field. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I do not see at all the connection, the straight line connection for whatever argument she is making, apparently against, and in all of these contexts, I hope we're talking about adults with trans issues coming straight from the pill, unless she is just talking about the general social liberalization of society. I make no bones about it. I am in favor of the general social liberalization of society. Because let me give you a very weird example. In Libertopia, little socialist communes can exist. But in communism, no little Libertopias could exist. In a socially liberal society, you can live a tradcon life if you want. You could have your little tradcon communes. In a tradcon society, the opposite isn't true. So one offers more freedom than the other. The problem is that the more restrictive being the, like in one instance, the tradcons, the more restrictive, in my view, in the economic side, being the communists, don't want the other people to have the freedoms. It kind of, they feel like it taints them in some way, like they have some existential right to have everyone live the way that they wish. Now, I do think we are going through a period of severe social upheaval that is not good, and we're going to see where we are going to land. But I think the ultimate solution is closer to Libertopia than The Handmaid's Tale. Let's just put it that way. I think this is a good place to stop. Let me see how much longer. Well, I think we're only about halfway through this video, so so far, we're still having some pretty good discussions on it. So there will at least be a part 3. Now, this is more chit chat. So you guys have just normal chit chat questions in chat. I would love to hear it. Also, as I've said before, I cannot tell you how happy it makes me when I get a new patron. Please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Pink Flame of Liberty. You do get extra content. We do book discussions is primarily the extra content you get, but I've also enabled YouTube memberships, which has the same extra Patreon content, but it only has one level. So there isn't any of the opportunity for promotion by Sean Dempsey's book. That's only through Patreon. But if you want to see these extra videos, you can use the YouTube membership program, because I know some people have philosophical problems with Patreon. Let me tell you, creators get more of a cut with Patreon than they do with YouTube, but it's completely and entirely up to you. I have started a new show. I recorded the first episode earlier tonight called Jurassic Dictionary. Has nothing so far to do with politics. It's just a fun jaunt, in my opinion, into words and history. I am going to be putting the first episode up as on Pink Flame of Liberty as members only, and on Patreon, so y'all can take a look at it. The release of it on the Jurassic Dictionary YouTube channel, which you can go subscribe to right now. There's no videos on it except for the trailer, but you can subscribe to it now, and so you can get it for free on Saturday. But if you'd like a little sneak peek into it, I'm going to upload it tonight to members only and to Patreon. And I'm probably going to be doing the same thing. I'm doing things in advance for my other channels for Pink Flame of Liberty. And hopefully maybe we'll get some people interested in libertarianism that are watching those shows that come over to check this one out. So I hope that you have an awesome evening. And Friday's usually date night, so I don't think I will see you Friday, and a lot of busy stuff coming up, and I'm glad we were able to spend some time together tonight. So have a good weekend. Mi guapas de libertad.
You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians, or choose to be an accountant because it's safe in the business, not because they want to